Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for our webinar this afternoon. While we wait for a few more attendees to join us, I'm going to send out a quick poll for you to answer. So that should appear on your screen now. And we just want to get a picture of the level of experience with our qualifications amongst attendees this afternoon. That's great, thank you. Right, okay then. Right, so on this screen you can see our agenda for the session today. We'll start with a quick introduction before moving on to an overview of the qualification. Then we'll talk through the unit content of each of the 7 units that make up the qualification. We'll then talk you through the internal assessment requirements and the quality assurance process that goes with that before we explain the external assessment requirements for the qualification. You'll see that there's time at the end for Q&A, but I would encourage you to ask questions throughout the session and we'll make time to answer them as we go. And you can do that by typing into the question pane, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. So we'll do a few introductions before we start. My name is Karen Taylor. I work in the curriculum team here at NCFE, and joining me this afternoon is our curriculum manager, Paul White. Paul has a background in teaching business qualifications up to level 5, and he's going to be talking through the unit content for this afternoon. So we do have a lot to get through. I'm going to hand you over to Paul, and we'll make a start.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's Paul White here. So first of all, just a broad overview of the qualification. The qualification is aimed at and designed for learners who want to study business and enterprise at a higher level. Qualification enables learners to develop their skills and knowledge and understanding in the business and enterprise sector. Qualification, as most of you are probably aware, is equivalent in size to an A-level, and it can be used within a study programme. Qualification is also suited for learners who want to progress on to higher education. That can be in general business, or it could be in some of the different pathways in business. So, for example, it could be human resource management, it could be finance, it could also be marketing or international business, for example. Okay, in terms of the recommended prior learning requirements, basically the qualifications aimed at learners from 16 to 19, schools and colleges, but it is still accessible for post-19 learners. We don't actually set any specific recommended requirements, but it is preferable if learners have achieved a level 2 qualification. We need to point out the centre's responsibility for ensuring that the qualification is appropriate for the age and ability of the learners that they have, and you also need to ensure that you fulfil the requirements of the learning outcomes. So you need to look at issues like the state and the level of literacy, numeracy, and also any health and safety aspects. Learners shouldn't really be taking this qualification if they're already doing a qualification at the same level with a similar title. Okay. Just want to draw your attention to the qualification specification. A lot of the information that we're going to present this afternoon can be found in the qualification specification, and this has only just recently been updated. So if anyone registered for the webinar before the 5th of October and decided to download the specification, the previous one I think was back in April of 2018. It has just been refreshed, so there might be a few minor differences. So draw your attention to that specification to cover things like the overview, the entry requirements and the assessment, etc. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the structure, draw your attention to a couple of key points. The total qualification time is 540 hours. So the GLH for the qualification is 360 plus the 2-hour external assessment. So that's a total of 362. So those are the actual guided learning hours. Anything additional between the 362 and the 540 would be for potentially enrichment activities or students doing work from home. I'm going to go and talk about the assessment requirements in a bit more detail later on, but essentially there are internally and externally assessed units from 1 to 7. So the externally set and assessed question paper, including the pre-release material, will be sampled from units from 1 to 5. We set out what the UCAS points are below, ranging from 16 for a pass right up to 56 for a distinction star. So brief overview then of the 7 units. 7 units are all mandatory. The units 1 to 5 have a mixed assessment method strategy. So 1 to 5 are all internally and externally assessed, whereas units 6 and 7, which are the business plan, the creation of the business plan and evaluation of the business plan, are only internally assessed. You can also see the guided learning hours for each of those modules. Note that there is quite a significant difference between the different modules, so ranging from just 20 guided learning hours for the business plan evaluation up to 90 guided learning hours for the actual business plan itself. The key thing around the assessment strategy is to understand the weightings for those 2 different types of assessment. So for the internally assessed units, they will contribute to 50% of the overall grade, and the external assessment, which is a 2-hour question paper, that contributes to the other. Those 2 assessment methods will give you the overall grade for the qualification. But it sets out a range of terms, gives you a little bit more information about what each one of those terms means, so that you can get a bit more clarification. So if there's anything that you're not sure of, can have a look at the back of the qual spec to get that glossary. In terms of marking, it's important that before you can consider a learner for the merit or the distinction criteria, they've got to have met the past descriptors or the descriptors at the level below first. So you couldn't, for example, be awarding a merit mark before the learner's passed, got a pass for all of the past descriptors. So that's an important point to take on board. Where there's more than one learning outcome for a unit and the learner gets a combination of grades, it's the lowest grade that must be awarded. So, for example, if in one of the units you've got 3 learning outcomes and the learner gets a merit, a pass and a merit for each of those 3 learning outcomes, the unit grade will be considered to be a pass. And again, that's another important thing to take into consideration. So learners must achieve a minimum of a pass in every unit and achieve a minimum of a pass in the external assessment. So if in any of the units or in the external assessment the learner is not yet achieved, then the overall grade will be not yet achieved. It is possible for a learner to claim a unit certificate. That can be issued if the learner has got a successful or a minimum pass grade in any one of the particular units. If the learner only achieves a pass in all internal assessments, their overall grade will be equivalent to their grade in the external assessment. So I'm just going to give you an overview of that in the grading tracker. The grading tracker is available in QualHub, and basically what this allows you to do is, hopefully you can all see that on the screen. So I've got the 7 units. So as we change those units to pass, hopefully what you'll be able to see, sorry. And then if I go to the external assessment, which is on the right hand side, you'll see that the overall grade, the estimated final grade is a pass. But the point I was making earlier is that if the external assessment is a merit, then that takes the estimated final grade up to a merit. And as some of these grades change, so for example, if the learner gets 4 merits and then goes to its distinction, that will take that estimated final grade up to a distinction. So as I say, this grade tracker is available on QualHub through our website, and that enables you to sort of like play around a little bit with the grades to see what the overall picture will be at the end. Just a couple of things to pick up around the general delivery issue. The indicative content, what you actually have to deliver, is in the section called Delivery and Assessment, which is in the Qualification specification. And just as a rider to that, what you do need to take account of is to note the difference between must and e.g. or could. So where in the specification it says or states must, that it's vital that that is covered with the learners and that they know that, because that will be subject to assessment. Where the words e.g. or could are used, this is illustrative, and that's to kind of amplify and augment your delivery, but it might not necessarily mean that that has to be assessed. So bear in mind those must statements, which tend to come at the beginning of each of the units. I'm just going to say a few words generally about the differences in the grading descriptors. Each unit has separate and individual grading descriptors, but there are a few themes generally running through the whole of the qualification, which are worth noting. So generally, when we're looking at a pass grade, it tends to be simple examples that are given, single examples. Where we're talking about merits, the responses from the learners tend to be more wide-ranging, with numerous examples. And then real key with the distinction grade looks at the interrelationships between the different concepts, and the examples that you would expect from the learners would tend to be more complex. Okay, so I'm just going to give you, this is an indicative or a sample delivery model. Generally, qualification delivered over 2 years. Again, in QualHub, we have something called a delivery guide, which will go into a lot more detail than what you can see here. I'm just giving you the overarching view. So when you get the link to the slides, you'll be able to view that delivery guide in more detail. In terms of the rules of delivery, the only kind of recommendations that we would make is to deliver Unit 1 first. It's important to deliver Unit 6 and 7 generally together, and at the end of the programme. We would expect that when it comes to the business plan and the ability of the learners to complete that assessment, they really will need to have covered the content and the delivery from Units 2 through to Units 5. Okay.
Right, we haven't had any questions in yet, but if anybody does have any questions about what Paul's talking through this afternoon, please type them in and we'll do our best to get the answer to you today.
Okay, thanks for that, Karen. So I'm just going to go on to Unit 1 first. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on each of the units and the learning outcomes. I don't propose to go through every single one. I'm going to pick out some of the key ones, but if anybody does have, as I say, any questions about any of the bullet points on what needs to be covered or any questions around that, we'll be happy to try and deal with those. So for Unit 1, starting a business enterprise, we've got 2 learning outcomes. One, the learner will understand how a business is started, and the second one will be around what should be included in a business plan. So in terms of learning outcome 1, you can see the indicative content there. Some of the key ones to pick out. It's always an interesting one when it comes to innovation and invention, and some of the key differences between those two. I know from previous experiences that learners can get a bit confused between the two. I think that we need to focus on the fact that invention is just around the creation of something, of a new product, whereas innovation tends to be more about improving an existing product. So taking an existing product and how that can be improved and then taken to market. So that's one of the key focuses in terms of that particular outcome. Traditionally, I know that learners sometimes struggle with the difference between shareholders and stakeholders. So, you know, look at that in the delivery and assessment in the qualification specification, and try and make clear in your delivery around stakeholders, and that will include internal stakeholders as well as obviously external stakeholders, and also within that delivery and assessment we'll be looking for some sort of stakeholder mapping, so looking at the relevant stakeholder power and the relevant level of interest that stakeholders have, and to map out where relevant stakeholders will sit within that matrix, and then the strategy that you would adopt for each of those 4 quadrants of the traditional stakeholder map. Looking at business and enterprise transaction models, basically in there, just looking at the 2 most notable ones, B2B and business to consumer, would be the 2 different models that we would expect to be covered. In terms of the business plan, the purpose of the business plan, and then the sections of the business plan. In terms of the sections of the business plan, there'd be generally 4 things that we would be looking to be covered in that. Company description, around the name of the business, aims and objectives, etc. Section on research and analysis, so target market, the industry profile, potential suppliers, etc. Marketing plan, where you cover generally the 4 P's of marketing: product, place, price, promotion. Section 4, people and operations plan. So consider operational considerations, staffing, etc. And then financial section with some forecasts, break-even analysis for first year, etc. The types of evidence for this in the assessments we would potentially expect to see could be a presentation, a report, annotated draft business plan. Okay, so
right. Well, we have had one question in. That's from Sharian. Just to clarify that this is a 2-year course to gain 1 A-level, so 360 guided learning hours, equivalent to 1 A-level. Doesn't have to be done over 2 years, though?
It doesn't have to be, so long as it meets
as long as you get the GLA.
So long as the guided learning hours are satisfied, then it could be delivered in a potentially shorter period of time than that.
Brilliant. Right, okay, then no more questions, but if you have any, please type them in.
Okay, I'm going to go on to Unit 2, where we're looking at the research and analysis methods for business and enterprise. So again, 2 learning outcomes for this particular unit. The first one, understanding how businesses and enterprises conduct research and identify market orientation and types. So orientation and marketing types is interesting. There's different views on orientation and marketing types. We're looking, generally speaking, for product orientation and marketing orientation to be covered. So with the product orientation, it would be where you focus on where organisations focus on the actual product itself. So, you know, examples of where organisations have adopted that type of approach might be Apple, for example. And then in terms of market orientation, it would be for organisations that respond to customer needs as opposed to other orientations that are not included in this, but you might want to bring to the learners will be around the production orientation, where examples of car production might be used, for example. So the focus in this one is, so long as you cover product and market orientation, that will be suffice. Second learning outcome is around using the different tools for analysis, and in particular PEST or the SWOT analysis. I think in terms of the SWOT analysis, most people will be aware, obviously, of the SWOT analysis, but I think one of the key things for learners to pick up would be to understand that the strengths and weaknesses part of the SWOT analysis should really focus on the internal aspects of the business. So what are the strengths and weaknesses internally of the organisation of the business, and then the opportunities and the threats focus more on those external factors. In terms of the PEST analysis, students might sort of say, or when they're doing research into this, come up with different versions of the PEST analysis. So in my teaching career, I've come across this STEP analysis, I've come across PESTLE analysis. So there are different ways of doing it, but for the purpose of this qualification, stick to the simple PEST, which will cover the political, the economic, social and technological changes. So it's those external changes in the external environment that learners should pick on, and certainly we're in very turbulent times, so there are lots of political changes going on in the landscape, which learners will be able to look at. We'll also cover environmental regulations, government regulations, employment law, so some of the legal changes that are going on as well. And we've had some real interesting cases, even only yesterday, with the business in Northern Ireland and the cake situation. So that's those of you who haven't seen the news or read that yesterday, that will be a real interesting one to include within your delivery, I think. So that's the Unit 2. So I think we'll move on to Unit 3.
Yep, we've had no more questions, so that's fine.
Marketing and promotion. So there are 2 learning outcomes for this particular unit. The first one, where the learners will need to understand the marketing mix and the idea of USP and added value. So the traditional 4 Ps, although lots of different academics over the years have tried to introduce different ways of conceiving and thinking about the marketing mix. Generally, marketeers still refer to the 4 Ps. The second learning outcome, how business and enterprise can create a promotional campaign. So this will take you through issues like planning a campaign, promotional objectives. I think one of the key ones here is for them to understand above and below the line promotional methods. Sometimes there can be a little bit of confusion about the difference between the two. So in terms of those above the line and below the line methods, generally we'll be looking at mass media as being those that are above the line promotional methods. So for example, television campaigns, radio campaigns. So they tend to be expensive, tend to be widespread, whereas the below the line promotional methods might be more direct selling or promotional, could be sponsorship, for example. So important to just distinguish between those 2. It's probably a good idea as well within the promotional mix to look at getting students to look at ADA as an advertising concept, so that that the learners learn this idea around trying to gain attention, interest, desire, and then call to action, which is a very traditional model in marketing which has been used for a number of years now. Okay, types of evidence that would be suitable for this particular module: report, a promotional campaign for a product or service, an analysis of an existing promotional campaign, a guide on how to devise a promotional campaign. Okay, so.
Right, we've had another question in from Sharian again. The learning outcomes which are being explained now for the units, are they for the internal, external assessment, or both?
They are for the unit and the.
If it's units 1 to 5, it would be for both,
yeah,
won't it? Because those are the units that are assessed using both internal and external assessment methods.
Yes.
Yeah. Right, so I hope that's answered that. Any more, keep them coming in and we'll respond as we go through.
So we're on to Unit 4, which is the management of people and operations. For this particular unit, we've got 3 learning outcomes. First one, understanding the organisations and management of people. So this will be talking about things like mission statements, company values, culture, leadership, management, motivation, structures, and operational considerations. In terms of organisational culture, there are a number of different culture models out there. The one that the specification refers to is the Handy's organisational culture model. So that's certainly one to think about covering. In terms of leadership and management styles, again, the basics that you would expect to see. So in terms of styles, the autocratic right through to the democratic and laissez-faire types of leadership styles. Looking at motivation, a couple of models that we would expect you to deliver in there. Obviously, the old favourite of Maslow, but also Hertzberg is another model that you might want to consider. Also within that, the methods of motivation, so not just the overarching theories, but also what types of things motivate individuals, ranging from financial issues around pay, reward, profit sharing, fringe benefits and things like that, through to non-financial methods, empowerment and job enrichment, team working, etc. It's probably also important to cover why motivation is important. So things around improving productivity, looking at improving rates of staff retention, but also generating ideas from internally from staff in terms of developing products and services for the organisation. Learning outcome 2 is around the learners and staff recruitment. So that's looking at different types of employment. So obviously there's a lot going on in the external environment around that at the moment, with their 0 hours contracts, part-time contracts, permanent. So we'd expect you to cover something around that. And then the different methods of remuneration. So salaries, piecework, bonuses, profit share, how commission works, for example, for sales staff, and performance-related pay. And then the third learning outcome will be around understanding the stages of the recruitment process and going through the different stages through recruitment through to dealing with staff training and contractual issues whilst employees are members of the organisation, through to departure from the organisation, through dismissal, etc. Evidence for this particular unit could include a report, a recruitment pack, or a presentation, which would include some briefing notes. Okay.
Right, we've had some really good questions in. When you were talking about learning outcome 1, Ursula's asked how much detail is required when explaining the models. So I know you'll have an answer, but I was going to just maybe then refer back to how you described the past merit and distinction descriptors. So maybe have a look at those again. So that was from Ursula anyway with LO1. So while you're thinking of the answer to that, we've had a couple of questions from Jo as well. So she's asked, is there one piece of internally assessed work for each unit, and then one exam at the end of the 2 years? So for each of the units, Jo, there's an internally assessed task that the learners have to do, and we will be talking through that in a bit more detail. But when it comes to the externally assessed part of the qualification, that's the one that covers units 1 to 5. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the end of the 2 years. The great thing about the Applied Generals is that they are quite flexible, and there are 2 opportunities for your learners to sit the external assessment. We will be talking about the external assessment timetable later on, but I can tell you that for this session, the learners could have an opportunity to sit in March, and there's also one in July, and that's the same for 2020 as well. And then Joe's asking about how are they moderated. Again, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. That's okay.
Okay, so just going back to that first question about how much detail. So on learning outcome 1, so for an award of a pass, the learner would just have to provide a simple explanation of the concepts of different leadership styles, and are generally with only one advantage and one disadvantage. Whereas if you got into, say, a merit, would expect a bit more detail of the explanation, and you would expect to have a number of advantages and disadvantages. So, say maybe it's 2 or 3. So that would be for the pass and the merit. In terms of a distinction at that level, you'd be looking to for a more detailed explanation, again explaining whether there is any interrelationship between the different types of leadership models, or if there's some common themes, or whether there are some key differences. So hopefully that answered that question on Unit 4.
Yeah, we've had no more come in, but if you do, just type them in.
So everybody's favourite unit, finance, 3 learning outcomes for the finance for business and enterprise module unit. Sorry. So in learning outcome 1, looking at the main financial considerations when starting and running a business. So we'll be looking at issues ranging from the sources of finance and revenue through to start-up and running costs. Interesting one around a break-even analysis. I think there's a good opportunity here with break-even analysis. Again, speaking from experience, as well as just sort of explaining break-even analysis, I think there's a real good opportunity to create a break-even analysis on a spreadsheet where the learners have the opportunity to put different numbers in for the fixed and variable costs, and also where they can change the prices, and as the prices go up and the costs can be adjusted for the fixed and variable costs, learners will be able to see how that break-even point changes as they play around with the different cost and price models. So a colleague of mine who was an accountant actually gave me a sort of a working spreadsheet for that, and I think that can sort of change quite a boring and prosaic concept into something that learners, particularly as they engage with it and start inputting their own numbers, quite like the idea of seeing how tweaking those numbers on the cost structures and the price structures can give them different break-even points, particularly if that's manifested itself not just in the background table with the numbers in, but if it's presented as a chart and they can physically see those key 3 key things change over time. It's really interesting. So that's just an idea in terms of trying to bring the break-even to life. Going on to learn outcome 2, understand some of the key documents to include in the business plan. So all the things that you would expect to see: profit and loss account, a balance sheet, and then some financial ratios. So in terms of the financial ratios, 3 broad areas that we would expect you to cover will be around the profitability ratios. So, for example, return on capital employed, net profit margin, gross profit margin. In terms of liquidity ratios, current ratio and the acid test. And then we'd also expect you to deliver something around financial ratios in terms of gearing and how heavily geared a business or an organisation is in terms of loans, etc. Going on to learning outcome 3, understanding how the internal external influences can affect a business's ability to meet its objectives. we'll be looking at three key things around internal and external influences and the impact of those internal and external influences. So, for example, HR, operational issues, culture in terms of internal influences, and then external influences, the state of the economy, current interest rates, changes in competitive environment, levels of employment, changes in legislation, are all examples. In terms of evidence for this particular unit, could include presentation or a report. Okay.
Right, we've had another question from Ursula. On the website, there's an excellent exemplary Unit 5. Can students have access to this before their assessment, or is it only for the teacher? So I would say you had access to it via the website, so there's no reason why your learner can't go ahead and find that themselves. And the whole point of providing exemplary material is that you can use it in your teaching and learning, so there's no reason why not, as long as it helps you. Yes, yep. That's it. That's all the questions for now.
Okay, so the final two units are around producing a business plan and then evaluating the business plan. So for Unit 6, it's just the one learning outcome, which is the learner will produce a business plan for an idea that they may have. So they will be looking to select an idea. Obviously, you know, go through a process of looking at different ideas, brainstorming different ideas that they can come up with, and then produce that the business plan. So some things they need to cover: the research skills, analysis skills, collection of data, primary and secondary research methods, etc. And also looking at all of the financial documents that we've discussed, using break-even analysis, for example, income statements, balance sheets, etc. So this is sort of why the Unit 6 and 7 really need to be delivered after you've covered the previous units. I'm just going to go quickly onto the evaluation because I'm conscious of time, and I know that we've got a little bit to cover on the internal and external assessment at the end. So in terms of evaluating the business plan, which is Unit 7. So in terms of the delivery, we'd expect you to spend a bit of time talking about how to present a business plan, around clarity, the quality of the language, the logic and the structure of the plan, strengths and weaknesses of the market research methodology. So looking at the advantages and disadvantages of primary and secondary sources, resources, the difference between qualitative and quantitative. In terms of feasibility of the idea, I expect you to cover things like, you know, is there a real demand for the product? Does the idea satisfy the need or solve the problem? How scalable is the idea? Is it likely just to operate in a very short period of time at a local level, or does it have potential to grow and become bigger? Is it financially viable? So do the projected profits warrant the start of the business to start with? How competitive is it? So, you know, other people out there that are doing similar types of things, and also the way that the idea is going to be marketed. Okay, so that's the Unit 7.
Right, we've had another question in from Ursula. For Unit 6 and 7, would it be advisable to set up a business and complete the business plan and evaluation for that business? So would that be advisable?
to set up an actual business.
I don't know if Ursula means setting up an actual business. I know it's not a requirement, is it?
No, there's. I think there's something around the learner coming up with the idea of generating.
Ursula's just commented, yes, an actual business. It's not a requirement, but if you would find that useful, then any delivery method that you find useful, I wouldn't say no to.
Yeah, in the learning outcomes, the learner's expected to select a business idea. Also, I don't think you could just have one, because then they're not selecting the business idea. They could potentially have a business set up and then have an idea for a product line or a different product within that business. But they've got to be able to actually generate some ideas and then select an idea. So you could present them with 3 or 4 different businesses and they select ideas and they select from that. Or if you did have an actual business, you would need to have it where there was a number of different potential products that business could offer, and then select from that. So I think that's what you would have to.
I hope that answers your question, Ursula. If not, we're going to put our contact details up at the end, so you can drop us an email and we'll further clarify that. So, as we discussed just very briefly before there, each of the 7 units that make up this qualification, for each of them, learners have to complete an internal assessment. And as you mentioned, NCFE have produced internal assessment sample tasks. Now, you can use these as they are. You can contextualise the sample tasks to suit your own circumstances, or if you want to, you can create your own, in which case you would refer to the internal assessment writing and delivery guide. Whichever task you choose to use, the work that is produced by learners has to be subjected to internal quality assurance. So that refers back to Joe's question about how the internal assessment is moderated. So an internal quality assurer, or IQA, will need to look at a sample of the assessed work just to check that the NCFE standards being applied consistently across the cohort. And who carries out the IQA role is up to the centre to decide, but you must remember that an assessor can't IQA their own work, and we do recommend that the IQA is occupationally competent. So if you've got more than one teacher delivering the qualification, they can IQA each other's work. Alternatively, if you are teaching on your own and you might not have anybody on your centre who is occupationally competent, if you know of a local centre who's delivering the same qualification, you could IQA each other's work as well, whatever works best for you. So you've set the internal assessment, your learners have submitted their evidence and you've graded the work. At that point, your learner won't get feedback at all until the quality assurance process is completed. So the next step would be the IQA, internal quality assurance, and then you would submit your grades onto the NCFE portal. So somebody in your centre will have access to the NCFE portal. If you're not sure who that is, if you want to give us a call, we can tell you who that is. If you want your own access to the portal, you could ask whoever has the master login at your centre, and they can set you up so you can upload your marks to the portal. Then will come your EQA visit, so your external quality assurer. Once you've registered your learners to the qualification, you'll be allocated an EQA. We'll recommend that you do register as soon as possible so that you can get in touch and get support regarding the qualification content, because that's what they are there for. And you can also plan your visits in as well. So when you submit your grades, your EQA will get a notification, and at that point would hope that you would have a date arranged as part of your planning for the overall year. But if you haven't, then you can get in touch and sort a convenient time. But you must remember that they've got a lot of centres to cover, so it's a good idea to get in touch with them as soon as you can to sort out that visit. At the visit, your EQA is basically doing what your IQA has done, so sampling the learner work, looking at feedback to the learners, but they'll also look at the IQA feedback to you as the assessor. So is the feedback supportive? Have they agreed grades that you've allocated? And what discussions taken place if they aren't in agreement? So your EQA will discuss with you during the visit whether they agree the grades or not. If they do, they will bank the grades. This means that at this point, it's their first submission, learner's first submission. You can then give the learners to work back with some summative feedback, and if needs be, the learner can resubmit if a higher grade's wanted. If the EQA doesn't agree, they'll discuss clearly with you during the visit why this is the case. Maybe you mark too harshly or too leniently, and what they'll do then is they'll reject the grades on the portal, and you'll have to resubmit the agreed grades. Again, that would be your learner's first submission. If the learners do want to resubmit, then the process would be repeated with work being sampled on the second visit. So for every cohort of learners you register, you get 2 free EQA visits. So once you've banked a grade for the internally assessed unit or units and the result from the external assessment, then you can claim the certificate. And again, that would be done via the portal. Right, so we'll move on. We haven't had any more questions, so we'll move on to the external assessment. So as we discussed earlier, the externally assessed element only covers content from units 1 to 5, and these are assessed synoptically by your 2-hour written examination. Pre-release material for the examination will be made available 4 weeks prior to the assessment, and that will be published via the NCFE website. And to support your delivery, you'll find sample external assessment papers on the Qual Hub, and that they can be used as mock exams to familiarise your learners with the format of the papers. And you'll also find mark schemes and chief examiner's reports there as well. I'm just going to stop at this time because we've had a question in from Sharian again. Our centre delivers levels 1 and 2. Can our EQA do 1 visit? Yes, they could. You would, because this would be in the same sector as your level 1 and 2 qualifications. It would be the same EQA, so that would make sense for them to do 1 visit. That would be fine. Right, so a few days after this webinar, we'll sort the recording out and upload that to YouTube. You'll be sent a follow-up email with a link to the recording. You'll have a transcript of any questions and answers and a copy of the slides that were talked through. On this slide, you'll find links to some important documents in there for anyone involved in the delivery of the qualification. Any of the documents that have been referred to throughout the session are also linked for you, so you should be able to just access those easily through this PowerPoint. So as I've said, the external assessment for this qualification is a 2-hour invigilated set date and time written assessment, and pre-release material will be made available. So set date and time assessments are self-explanatory. NCFE published dates and times for when an assessment must be completed, and you can find the external assessment timetable using the link on the screen. This will give you the dates and times of assessments for the coming session and for the one after. So as I mentioned earlier, there are opportunities to sit the external assessment in March and July. You'll also see here a link to our regulations for the conduct of external assessment, and that needs to be read by anyone involved with the delivery of the assessment. Our regulations allow for the start time for an assessment to be up to 30 minutes earlier than or 30 minutes later than the published time, but if you want to change greater than that, you need to submit a request. You've also got a link to the qualification-specific instructions for delivery document. We call that the QSID, which is a lot easier, but this will provide you with instructions specific to each individual qualification. So again, it's important to familiarise yourself with this. And the last document on this slide is our reasonable adjustments and special considerations policy. So all learners should have access to our qualifications and assessments where possible. So if any of your learners have any special needs that have been assessed formally, then you can submit a request for reasonable adjustments. If your learner already has authorisation from JCQ, then you can attach this to your request, and it speeds the process up. So you can have a look in that document and see what you have to apply for, what's a centre delegated adjustment and what we need to authorise. And there are timescales in there as well. So we've had another question in here. Do the level 1 and 2 qualifications that someone else mentioned count in the performance tables? That's from Joe. Would you actually have a new combined level 1 and 2 qualification? And that is on the performance tables for 2020. And we have a level 2 certificate as well. But the newer model, the combined level 1 and 2 qualification, that is the one that we're trying to encourage people to take up, because it does have a compensatory nature. And level 1 and 2 are included in the one qualification. We do have a webinar that we've done about that, so I'll include a link in the follow-up email to that if you want more information about that, Joe. Right, I think we've covered most of the questions. So on this screen here, you can see our contact details. If you do have any further questions that you think of after this session, don't hesitate to get in touch. That's our email address at the top for the curriculum team. Like I said, in a few days' time, I will send you a follow-up email. And before we leave this afternoon, I am going to send out one more quick poll, because I do appreciate that we've gone through this very quickly. So I just wanted to know if you'd be interested in attending any maybe shorter webinars that focus on individual units, just so we can help plan our support in place. That's great. Thanks for those who've responded to that. So Paul had mentioned a grading glossary, which I will put up on the screen now for you. And that is here. So that's in the specification, but it'll also be in your follow-up email. So that brings us to the end, and we're just about 4 minutes short of an hour, so that's just about perfect. So I'd like to thank you for all your great questions. Thanks for making it really interactive, and I hope you found the session useful. Don't forget our email address if you need anything. So thank you.
Bye.
Bye.